Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the exploration ship Harmony and watched the massive space station grow larger on the screen. Nexus Prime was the biggest thing he had ever seen in space. The station stretched for thousands of miles in all directions and glowed with strange blue lights that seemed to pulse like a heartbeat. This was the capital of the Zephyrian Empire and the center of power for 3,000 years. Jake felt nervous but tried not to show it. Behind him stood Ambassador Lisa Grant, who would speak for all of humanity today. She held a small device that contained the greatest music Earth had ever created. Next to her was Dr. Amy Rodriguez, who knew more about human music than anyone alive. They were here to ask the Empire to let humans join the big family of space civilizations. The Harmony moved slowly through the docking bay. Alien ships of every shape and size filled the space around them. Some looked like giant flowers made of metal, while others appeared to be living creatures that could fly through space. Jake had never imagined there were so many different kinds of beings in the universe. Now he hoped they would all become friends with humanity. A voice came through the radio speaking in perfect English. The Empire had been watching human broadcasts for decades and learned their languages. Human vessel Harmony, you are cleared to dock at Platform 7. Prepare for formal reception in 1 hour. Jake nodded to his crew. They had practiced this moment 100 times, but it still felt unreal. Humans had only learned to travel faster than light 5 years ago. Before that, they were trapped in their own solar system, while the rest of the galaxy moved forward without them. Now they had a chance to catch up. The airlock opened with a soft hiss, and Jake got his first look at a living Zephyrian. The being stood 8 feet tall with skin that looked like living crystal. Colors moved under the surface of its skin like oil on water. The creature wore flowing robes that seemed to be made from starlight itself. When it spoke, its voice sounded like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. Welcome, humans. I am Guide Nexai. The council waits for your presentation. They walked through corridors that seemed to go on forever. The walls showed moving pictures of thousands of different worlds. Jake saw cities that floated in clouds and oceans filled with creatures that glowed like stars. Everything was beautiful and peaceful. No wonder the Empire had lasted so long. The council chamber was enormous. 50 Zephyrians sat in a circle around a stage in the center. Their crystal skin shifted through different colors as they watched the humans enter. High Regent Vextar sat on a throne that appeared to be carved from a single massive diamond. His skin glowed brighter than the others, and Jake could feel power radiating from him like heat from a fire. Humans of Earth, Vextar said in his musical voice, you have traveled far to reach us. Show us what your people have created. Let us understand what humanity brings to the galaxy. Lisa walked to the center of the chamber. Her hands shook slightly as she activated the music device. The first sounds that filled the air were from a human orchestra playing Mozart. The violins sang with perfect harmony while the other instruments joined in to create something beautiful and complex. Jake watched the Zephyrians carefully. Their skin colors shifted, but he could not tell what the changes meant. Next came Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. The famous opening notes echoed through the chamber with their message of triumph over struggle. Then Lisa played music from every part of Earth. There was jazz from America that made Jake think of late nights in smoky clubs. There was classical music from Europe that spoke of centuries of human achievement. There was folk music from Africa that told stories of ancient tribes and their connection to the land. Amy stepped forward and began to explain what each piece meant. She told them how music helped humans express feelings they could not put into words. She explained how different cultures used rhythm and melody to bring people together, and how songs could make someone feel happy or sad or proud. She spoke with passion about how music was the universal language that all humans shared regardless of where they came from. The presentation lasted for 2 hours. Jake thought it was the most beautiful thing he had ever heard. The music filled him with pride for his species and hope for the future. When the last note faded away, the chamber fell silent. Then something happened that Jake would never forget. The Zephyrians began to change colors rapidly. Their crystal skin flashed through shades of blue and green and yellow. The translation device in Jake's ear began to beep and then spoke in a flat electronic voice. Emotional state detected, amusement. High Regent Vextar rose from his throne. His skin had turned a bright shade of gold that somehow looked like laughter made visible. How charming, he said in his wind chime voice. Your species creates organized noise and calls it art. We appreciate this quaint expression of your primitive emotional responses. Jake felt like someone had punched him in the stomach. Lisa's face turned red and Amy looked like she might cry. The other council members were now glowing with the same golden color. They were all laughing at humanity's greatest achievement. Music is how less developed species deal with feelings they cannot control, Vextar continued. We evolved beyond such crude methods long ago. We find it amusing that you still need these sound patterns to manage your emotional states. The council discussed humanity's request to join the Galactic Federation. Jake could only understand parts of their conversation, but the meaning was clear. They thought humans were too primitive to be trusted with advanced technology. They worried that human emotional instability might disrupt the peace that had lasted for millennia. Finally, Vextar announced the decision. Humans of Earth, you may trade with Empire worlds, but you are forbidden from sharing your disruptive sound patterns in civilized space. Perhaps in a few thousand years, when your people have evolved beyond these primitive expressions, you may apply again. The meeting was over. Jake led his delegation back to their ship in silence. As the Harmony left the station, he looked back at Nexus Prime. The Empire controlled thousands of worlds and trillions of beings. They had technology that seemed like magic and wisdom that came from ruling the galaxy for longer than human civilization had existed. But as Jake watched the station shrink behind them, he could not shake the feeling that the Empire had just made the biggest mistake in their long history. They had heard the greatest music humanity could create and called it noise. They had seen the human soul expressed in perfect harmony and laughed at it. Jake did not know it yet, but across the galaxy other beings had been listening to the broadcast of human music. Unlike the Zephyrians, these creatures heard something the Empire could never understand. They heard hope and beauty in the sound of a species that refused to give up even when everything seemed impossible. The Empire had laughed at human art, but soon they would learn that sometimes the most powerful weapon in the universe was a simple song sung by people who believed in something greater than themselves. The news traveled fast through human space. Every colony, world, and space station heard about what happened at Nexus Prime within days. Captain Jake Morrison had sent a full report to Earth Command, and the politicians were angry. They called emergency meetings and made speeches about the insult to human dignity. But the real changes started in places no one expected. Danny Foster was playing guitar in a small club on Mars Colony when he heard the news. The music stopped and everyone in the room sat in shocked silence. Danny had been writing songs since he was 12 years old and could not imagine a universe where music was considered worthless noise. He put down his guitar and walked out into the red desert night. By morning, Danny had written a new song called They Called It Noise and recorded it in his apartment. The song spread through the human colonies like wildfire. Every musician picked up their instruments and played it. Every singer learned the words. It became an anthem of defiance against an empire that could not understand the human heart. On Earth, composer Helen Price published an article that made her famous overnight. She wrote about how the empire's rejection proved they were afraid of human creativity. They rule through fear and control, she wrote. But music teaches us that there are things more important than survival. Art makes us human, and that terrifies them. But the real story was happening far from Earth in the cargo holds of human freighter ships. Captain Rick Chen was hauling supplies to the mining world of Kepler 442b when everything changed. His crew was mixed like most freight operations. There were humans who needed the work and alien refugees who had nowhere else to go. Rick always played music during the long, boring flights between stars. It helped keep the crew calm and made the empty darkness of space feel less lonely. His collection included everything from classical symphonies to modern rock songs. The human crew members knew all the words and would sing along when they thought no one was listening. The alien workers usually ignored the music. They were Vorthons who had lost their homeworld when the Empire decided it had valuable minerals underneath the surface. The small insect-like beings kept to themselves and rarely spoke to anyone. Rick had tried to be friendly, but they seemed too sad to care about anything. On this trip, something different happened. Rick was playing an old recording of Amazing Grace sung by a church choir when he heard a strange sound from the cargo bay. It was a high-pitched keening noise that made his skin crawl. He thought something had broken and went to investigate. What he found changed his understanding of the universe forever. The Vorthons were gathered in a circle around one of the speakers. Their whole bodies were shaking and clear fluid was leaking from their large compound eyes. They were crying. Elder Clicktie was the oldest Vorthon on the ship and rarely spoke to humans. Now he approached Rick with his antennae trembling. The translation device on Rick's belt struggled to convert the aliens' clicking sounds into words. "This sound pattern," Clicktie whispered, "it speaks to the deep heart. It makes the lost pain into something else, something that does not destroy but builds." Rick did not understand what the alien meant, but he could see the effect the music was having. The Vorthons, who had been silent and withdrawn for months, were now talking to each other in their clicking language. Some of them were even trying to hum along, with the human melodies using sounds their insect vocal cords could barely make. When the ship reached Kepler 442b, the Vorthans asked Rick if they could have copies of the music. He gave them data chips loaded with hundreds of human songs from every culture and time period. The aliens took the chips like they were receiving precious gifts. Elder Clicktie spoke to Rick one more time before leaving the ship. "The Empire took our world and scattered our people across the galaxy. They said it was for the greater good of civilization. But this music shows us that some things are worth more than efficiency and order. Thank you for reminding us what it feels like to hope." The Vorthans spread out across the mining colony carrying their music chips. Within days, every member of their species on the planet had heard human songs. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The aliens who had been passive and defeated suddenly began organizing themselves. They formed cultural groups to share memories of their lost world. They started teaching their children the old stories that connected them to their ancestors. But something even more important was happening. The Vorthans discovered that certain human songs helped them work together in ways they had forgotten. When they sang "We Shall Overcome" while moving heavy equipment, the job became easier because everyone moved in rhythm. When they hummed classical pieces during their rest periods, they felt connected to something larger than their individual suffering. Word of the music began to spread through the underground networks that connected refugee populations across the galaxy. Data chips were copied and shared in secret. Alien species that had never communicated before found themselves united by their love of human melodies. On the factory world of Titan 7, enslaved Karathi workers heard their first human song when a maintenance robot accidentally broadcast a signal meant for the human overseers. The song was "Swing Low, Sweet Chariot," and it told the story of people who endured suffering while dreaming of freedom. The Karathi had no concept of chariots or the human religion that created the song, but they understood the feeling behind it perfectly. The blue-skinned Karathi began to hum the melody while they worked in the crystal mines. Their Zephyrian guards noticed the sound but did not think it was important. To the Empire's crystal ears, human music was just random noise. They could not hear the mathematical patterns and emotional structures that made it meaningful to other species. But the Karathi workers were using the songs to communicate. Different melodies meant different things. A lullaby indicated that guards were coming. A work song meant it was safe to share information. A hymn was the signal to prepare for something important. Maya Thompson was a former Earth military communications officer who had become a freelance trader after the Nexus Prime incident. She was transporting medical supplies to refugee camps when she noticed what was happening. Everywhere she went, alien beings were asking for human music. They offered to pay with valuable minerals and rare metals for simple recordings that any human child could have made. Maya realized she was seeing something historic. Music was becoming a form of currency and communication that the Empire could not control or understand. She started working with other human traders to create a network for distributing songs to alien populations. They called it the Underground Symphony. The network grew quickly because it filled a need no one had recognized before. The Empire ruled through efficient administration and logical resource allocation. They provided food and shelter and work for trillions of beings. But they had never understood that intelligent creatures needed more than physical survival. They needed beauty and meaning and connection to something greater than themselves. Human music provided all of these things. A simple folk song could remind an alien refugee of their lost homeland. A complex symphony could give structure to chaotic emotions. A protest song could unite different species around the idea that their lives had value beyond their usefulness to the Empire. Dr. Amy Rodriguez was studying reports of these developments when she made a startling discovery. The alien brain scans showed that human music was literally rewiring neural pathways in other species. It was activating dormant sections of their minds that dealt with abstract concepts like hope and dignity and self-determination. The Empire had accidentally created the perfect conditions for revolution. They had gathered millions of displaced beings from conquered worlds and forced them to live together in camps and factory towns. They had removed all forms of native culture and art because they considered such things inefficient distractions. But they had not anticipated that humans would fill this void with something even more powerful than what had been lost. Amy wrote a secret report that was shared only with Earth's military and political leaders. Human music is not just entertainment, she explained. It appears to be a form of cognitive enhancement that helps other species develop advanced emotional and social capabilities. We have accidentally created the most effective propaganda tool in galactic history. Meanwhile, on distant worlds, the revolution was already beginning. It started small with work songs and lullabies. But as more species learned about human music, they began to understand concepts that the Empire had tried to suppress. They learned about individual worth and collective action. They discovered that there were things worth fighting for even when victory seemed impossible. The Empire's vast intelligence networks began to report strange disturbances across their territory. Productivity was declining on factory worlds. Refugee populations were becoming harder to manage. Coordination between different species was improving in ways that made administrators nervous. Hi, Regent Vextar received reports about these harmonic anomalies but did not understand their significance. To his crystalline mind, the idea that sound patterns could affect behavior was absurd. The Empire had evolved beyond such primitive responses millions of years ago. How could organized noise possibly threaten the greatest civilization in galactic history? Commander Pete Williams sat in his office at Earth Defense Command, reading reports that seemed like science fiction. 2 years had passed since the Nexus Prime incident, and the galaxy was changing in ways no one had predicted. His desk was covered with intelligence files from human traders and diplomats scattered across Empire space. Every report told the same impossible story. Human music was starting a revolution. The latest file came from Agent Carlos Martinez, who was working undercover on the prison world of Grimhold. Carlos had been arrested for smuggling medical supplies to refugee camps, but that was just his cover story. His real mission was to document what the Empire called harmonic contamination in their detention facilities. Carlos reported that human songs were spreading through the prison like a virus. Inmates from dozens of different species were learning melodies by listening to other prisoners hum them. They could not understand the words, but the emotional content was universal. A work song gave them strength during forced labor. A lullaby helped them sleep despite the terrible conditions. A hymn reminded them that they were more than just numbers in the Empire's files. Pete, read another report from the industrial world of Kepler 186b. The Nexari workers there had somehow learned "We Shall Overcome" and were singing it during their shifts. The Zephyrian overseers did not recognize it as a protest song because their species could not process the emotional information embedded in human music. To them, it sounded like random noise. But to the enslaved aliens, it was a declaration of hope and defiance. Dr. Amy Rodriguez had been promoted to head the new Department of Cultural Defense after her discovery about music's effect on alien brains. She briefed Pete on the latest research findings. The mathematical structures in human music apparently matched neural patterns that were common to most sentient species. What the Empire dismissed as primitive noise actually contained complex emotional and organizational information. The songs are teaching them to think differently, Amy explained. Species that have been passive for generations are suddenly developing concepts like individual rights and collective action. It's as if human music is awakening parts of their minds that the Empire never knew existed. Pete studied the brain scans Amy had gathered from various alien populations. The before and after images were dramatic. Beings who had been exposed to human music showed increased activity in areas associated with abstract thinking and social bonding. Their neural networks were literally rebuilding themselves around new patterns of thought. The implications were staggering. For 3,000 years, the Empire had maintained control through a simple strategy. They provided basic needs like food and shelter while suppressing anything that might encourage independent thinking. Art and music were banned because they were considered inefficient and potentially disruptive. The strategy had worked perfectly until humans arrived with their organized noise. Now, across the galaxy, suppressed populations were rediscovering concepts the Empire thought they had eliminated forever. On the mining world of Proxima 7, Karathi slaves were using work songs to coordinate their movements. The simple act of singing together while they worked was teaching them that individual actions could be part of something larger and more powerful. Maya Thompson had expanded her underground symphony network to include hundreds of human traders and thousands of alien contacts. The operation was becoming so large that it needed military-level organization and security. Maya came to Earth to brief Pete on the current situation and request official support. "We're not just distributing music anymore," Maya explained. "We're running the galaxy's first cultural resistance network. Songs are being used to pass information between worlds. Different melodies have different meanings. A children's song might contain evacuation routes. A folk ballad could coordinate simultaneous uprisings across multiple star systems." Pete approved Maya's request for official backing and additional resources. The Underground Symphony was given access to military encryption technology and long-range communication systems. Earth's best composers began working with resistance leaders to create specific pieces for different operations. Grace Kelly was a former military communications specialist who had become one of Earth's most innovative composers. She joined Maya's network and began developing what she called tactical music. These were songs designed to achieve specific psychological and social effects on different alien species. A piece written for Vorthons might emphasize themes of unity and perseverance. Music for Karathi populations would focus on strength and determination. The Empire was beginning to notice the effects of human music, but they still did not understand what they were facing. High Regent Vextar received reports about declining productivity and increased unrest across his territory. Imperial administrators complained that previously docile populations were becoming harder to manage. Workers were forming unauthorized groups and refugees were showing signs of organization that had not been seen for centuries. Vextar assigned Inquisitor Zixmore to investigate these harmonic disturbances that seemed to precede every major disruption. Zixmore was one of the Empire's most brilliant investigators and had solved thousands of cases involving political dissent and terrorist activity. But this was unlike anything he had encountered before. The Inquisitor's initial reports were confusing and contradictory. He could find no evidence of traditional rebellion or terrorist networks. There were no weapons caches or political organizations. No charismatic leaders were making speeches or distributing propaganda. Instead, there was only music. Simple melodies that alien beings hummed while they worked or sang to their children at night. Zixmore could not understand how these sound patterns could possibly threaten the Empire. His crystalline neural structure was incapable of processing the emotional content that made human music so powerful to other species. When he heard a human song, it sounded like random noise with no meaning or purpose. The idea that such sounds could inspire revolution seemed absurd, but the evidence was undeniable. Every world where human music had appeared was showing signs of increased resistance activity. Previously isolated populations were somehow coordinating their actions across vast distances. Different species were working together in ways that had never been documented before. The breakthrough came when Zixmore captured a group of Nexari rebels on the factory world of Wolf 359b. Under interrogation, they revealed that they were using human songs to communicate and organize their activities. Different musical phrases corresponded to tactical information. Rhythm patterns indicated timing for coordinated actions. Even the choice of which song to sing could convey complex strategic data. Zixmore realized he was dealing with a form of communication that the Empire's technology could not detect or decode. Human music appeared to be a perfect steganographic system. Information was hidden in plain sight within melodies that the Empire dismissed as meaningless noise. The rebels were essentially broadcasting their plans on open channels while remaining completely invisible to Imperial intelligence. The Inquisitor's final report to High Regent Vextar was classified at the highest levels of Imperial security. Zixmore concluded that human music represented a new form of warfare that threatened the fundamental structure of the Empire. The songs were not just inspiring rebellion. They were literally reprogramming alien brains and teaching suppressed populations to think in ways that the Empire could not control or predict. But even as Zixmore was writing his report, the revolution was accelerating, beyond anyone's ability to stop it. On the agricultural world of Kepler 452b, entire populations of Karathi workers had learned to sing Amazing Grace while they harvested crystal crops. The song's message about redemption and freedom was resonating with beings who had never heard of human religion but understood the universal themes of hope and Transformation. The Zephyrian overseers noticed that productivity was actually improving when the workers sang together. They decided to encourage the behavior because it seemed to make the aliens more efficient. They had no idea they were allowing their slaves to practice collective action and share information about upcoming escape attempts. Similar scenes were playing out across thousands of worlds. Imperial administrators were unknowingly facilitating the spread of human music because their species could not recognize its true significance. They saw improved worker morale and increased cooperation between different populations. They missed the growing networks of resistance that were forming around shared melodies and common dreams of freedom. Pete Williams received daily reports about the expanding revolution, but he also received increasingly urgent warnings from his intelligence analysts. The Empire was powerful beyond human comprehension and had maintained control for longer than human civilization had existed. When they finally understood what was happening, their response would be swift and devastating. Amy Rodriguez made a disturbing discovery while analyzing captured Zephyrian communications. The Empire's crystalline biology made them immune to the emotional effects of human music, but it also made them incapable of understanding how it affected other species. They were fighting an enemy they could not see using weapons they could not detect. High Regent Vextar stood in the center of the Imperial War Council chamber, reading Inquisitor Zixmore's final report. The document was classified beyond the highest security levels because its contents threatened the very foundation of everything the Empire believed about civilization and order. Around him, the most powerful beings in the galaxy waited in crystalline silence for his response. The report contained brain scans and behavioral analysis from thousands of alien subjects across dozens of worlds. The conclusion was inescapable and terrifying. Human music was not just inspiring rebellion among the Empire's subjects. It was literally rewriting their neural pathways and awakening cognitive functions that had been dormant for millennia. The sound patterns designated as human music appeared to activate previously unknown neural networks in non-Zephyrian species. Zixmore had written, "Subjects exposed to these patterns show increased activity in brain regions associated with abstract thinking, emotional processing, and social coordination. More disturbing is the evidence that these changes are permanent and appear to be spreading through populations via social contact even without direct exposure to the original stimuli." Vextar's crystalline skin shifted through deep shades of red and purple as he processed the implications. The Empire had ruled for 3,000 years by maintaining strict control over information and suppressing any form of cultural expression that might encourage independent thought. The strategy had been perfectly effective until humans arrived with their organized noise. War Marshal Crichton stepped forward from the circle of advisors. His massive crystal form glowed with aggressive orange patterns as he spoke. "High Regent, the solution is obvious. We declare human music a form of biological warfare and eliminate it completely. Every recording must be destroyed, and every being caught possessing such material will be executed immediately." General Vexai nodded her agreement. "Our intelligence networks report that the contamination has spread to over 400 worlds. Traditional suppression methods are no longer sufficient. We need to demonstrate that defiance of imperial order will result in consequences severe enough to deter further rebellion." Vextar considered their recommendations while studying the latest reports from across his territory. Production quotas were failing on dozens of worlds. Refugee populations that had been passive for generations were forming unauthorized organizations. Different species were cooperating in ways that violated centuries of careful social engineering designed to prevent exactly this kind of unified resistance. The High Regent made his decision with the cold logic that had sustained the Empire through 3 millennia of expansion and consolidation. Issue Imperial Decree 7751. Human musical recordings are hereby classified as weapons of mass destruction. Possession of such materials is punishable by immediate termination. Any world showing signs of harmonic contamination will be subject to complete orbital sterilization. The decree was transmitted across the galaxy within hours through the Empire's quantum communication networks. Imperial governors received orders to begin systematic raids on any location where human music might be hidden. Enforcement squads were authorized to use unlimited force, and commanders were instructed that preventing the spread of harmonic weapons justified any level of collateral damage. The response was swift and brutal beyond anything the galaxy had seen in centuries. On the mining world of Titan 7, Imperial troops surrounded the Karathi worker settlements and began searching every dwelling for music storage devices. When they found a group of children singing a human lullaby, the entire family was executed as an example to the others. Captain Jake Morrison received the news while commanding the Earth defense vessel, Freedom's Voice, on patrol near the border of human space. His communications officer handed him a priority message from Earth Command that made his blood run cold. The Empire was systematically destroying any trace of human music they could find and killing anyone suspected of preserving it, sir, his tactical officer reported. We're receiving distress signals from Sanctuary Station. Imperial warships are bombarding the refugee camps. Jake watched in horror as the tactical display showed 3 massive Zephyrian battleships firing plasma cannons at the space station that housed over 2 million displaced beings from dozens of species. The refugees had committed no crime except learning to sing human songs that reminded them they were more than just property of the Empire. All stations battle alert, Jake ordered. Set course for Sanctuary Station maximum speed. Send a message to Earth Command requesting immediate military reinforcement. But even as the Freedom's Voice raced toward the battle, Jake knew they would arrive too late. The Empire's ships were among the most advanced in the galaxy, and Sanctuary Station had no defenses against their assault. By the time human reinforcements could arrive, there would be nothing left but debris and dead civilians. The massacre at Sanctuary Station was broadcast across the galaxy as a warning to other populations. High Regent Vextar appeared on every Imperial communication channel to explain the new policy. The Empire has maintained peace and order for 3,000 years by eliminating threats to civilization before they can spread. Human sound patterns have been identified as a form of biological warfare designed to destabilize our social systems. Any being found possessing these weapons will be treated as an enemy combatant. But the crackdown had the opposite effect from what the Empire intended. Instead of discouraging rebellion, the brutal suppression convinced many alien populations that they had nothing left to lose. If the Empire was willing to commit genocide to silence their songs, then those songs must contain something truly dangerous to the existing order. On the fortress world of Grimhold, the Imperial prison held over 50,000 beings from across the galaxy. Most were political dissidents or refugees who had violated some obscure regulation. The prison was considered escape-proof because it was built inside a hollowed-out asteroid, surrounded by automated defense platforms. Agent Carlos Martinez had been trapped there for 6 months while gathering intelligence on prison conditions. His cover as a medical smuggler had held up under interrogation, but now the new decree made his situation much more dangerous. Imperial security forces were searching every cell for evidence of human music, and the penalties for possession had become lethal. Carlos made a desperate decision. If the Empire was going to kill prisoners for knowing human songs, then he would make sure as many inmates as possible learned them before the searches began. During the evening meal period, he began to whistle Beethoven's Ode to Joy. The simple melody carried clearly through the prison's metal corridors. Within minutes, other prisoners were humming along with the tune. Some had heard it before during the Underground Symphony's distribution efforts, while others were learning it for the first time. The music spread from cell to cell as beings who could not speak each other's languages found they could share something beautiful. Despite their captivity, the prison guards noticed the increased noise but did not immediately recognize it as human music. To Zephyrian ears, the melody sounded like random vocalizations from distressed prisoners. By the time security realized what was happening, thousands of inmates across the facility had learned the tune. The Imperial response was predictably harsh. Prison Commander Vexkill ordered immediate lockdown and began systematic interrogation of every prisoner. Those who could hum the human melody were marked for execution, but something unprecedented happened when the security teams tried to implement the order. The prisoners began to sing together, not just the humans and not just those who knew the words. Thousands of beings from dozens of species raised their voices in a harmony that had never been heard in the galaxy before. The song echoed through the corridors and penetrated every corner of the asteroid fortress. Commander Vexkill found himself facing something his training had never prepared him for. The prisoners were not fighting or rioting. They were not trying to escape or resist arrest. They were simply singing, and their collective voice was somehow more terrifying than any weapon or battle cry he had ever encountered. The situation spiraled beyond the prison commander's ability to control when his own guards began to show signs of being affected by the music. The Karathi and Vorthan security personnel were not immune to the emotional power of human songs. Some began to hesitate when ordered to fire on singing prisoners. Others started humming the melody themselves. Dr. Amy Rodriguez was analyzing intercepted Imperial communications when she made a discovery that changed everything. The Empire's crackdown was failing not because of organized resistance, but because of something much simpler and more profound. The Zephyrian species was literally incapable of understanding how music affected other beings. "They're fighting blind," Amy reported to Commander Williams. "Their crystalline neural structure makes them immune to the emotional effects of music, but it also makes them unable to predict how other species will respond. They keep escalating the violence because they can't comprehend why their usual tactics aren't working." The revelation explained why the Empire's response had been so clumsy and counterproductive. For 3,000 years they had maintained control through fear and logical resource management. Grace Kelly stood in the center of the hidden base carved deep inside an asteroid in the Sigma Centauri system. Around her were screens showing the locations of musicians scattered across 200 worlds throughout the galaxy. Each person represented years of careful planning and incredible risk. Tonight they would attempt something that had never been done before in galactic history. Grace had spent months composing the piece she called The Unbreaking. It combined musical elements from every human culture with harmonic structures specifically designed to resonate with alien neural patterns. The song was more than entertainment or even propaganda. It was a carefully crafted tool intended to awaken every suppressed population in the galaxy simultaneously. "All stations report ready," announced Maya Thompson from her position at the communications console. The underground symphony network had evolved into something resembling a military command center. Former Earth defense officers worked alongside alien refugees and human traders to coordinate the largest cultural operation in history. Captain Jake Morrison floated in space aboard the Freedoms, voice leading a small fleet of human ships toward the heart of the Empire. His orders were simple but terrifying. Get close enough to Nexus Prime to broadcast Grace's symphony at maximum power. The song needed to reach every world in the Imperial core to have its intended effect. "Enemy fleet detected," reported his tactical officer. 57 Zephyrian warships moving to intercept. Estimated contact in 47 minutes. Jake nodded grimly. Earth Command had given him every available ship, but they were still vastly outnumbered. The Empire's vessels were larger and more advanced than anything humanity could build. This would not be a battle won through superior firepower, but through something the enemy could not understand or counter. Dr. Amy Rodriguez was monitoring alien neural activity from her research station on Luna. Brain scans from test subjects showed that human music was having increasingly powerful effects as more species learned to process the emotional information embedded in the melodies. What started as simple appreciation had evolved into something approaching cognitive enhancement. "The harmonic resonance is reaching critical levels," she reported to Grace over the quantum communication link. "When you begin the broadcast, we expect massive neural activation across all non-Zephyrian populations in range. The psychological impact should be unprecedented." High Regent Vexitar stood on the command bridge of his flagship watching the approaching human fleet. Intelligence reports indicated they were attempting some kind of coordinated action involving their noise weapons, but he could not imagine what they hoped to accomplish. The Empire's military superiority was absolute, and the human ships would be destroyed long before they could reach transmission range of any major population centers. "Prepare orbital bombardment of the human homeworld," he ordered his fleet commanders. "Once we eliminate their vessels, we will sterilize Earth and end this contamination permanently." But Vextar was making the same mistake the Empire had been making for 3 years. He was fighting an enemy he could not see using strategies designed for conventional warfare. Human music had already spread too far to be stopped by destroying its source. The seeds of revolution were growing in the minds of beings across the galaxy, and no amount of military force could root them out. Grace began the countdown to the synchronized broadcast. Her voice echoed through communication channels that connected human traders on the edge of Imperial space to alien resistance cells hidden in the deepest levels of factory worlds. All stations prepare for transmission. Begin the song on my mark. The first notes of the unbreaking began to play from hidden speakers and concealed transmitters on worlds throughout the galaxy. The melody started soft and simple like a lullaby, but gradually built in complexity and power. Different sections were designed to activate specific neural pathways in different species, while the overall structure created patterns that any intelligent being could recognize and respond to. On the mining world of Kepler 442b, the Vorthan workers stopped their drilling operations as the music reached them through the colonial communication network. Elder Clicktie felt tears streaming down his face as harmonies he had never imagined possible filled the underground caverns where his people labored. Around him, thousands of aliens from dozens of species began to move in rhythm with the song. The effect was not marching or fighting, but something more powerful and more terrifying to Imperial observers. The beings were dancing. In the face of centuries of oppression and the immediate threat of violent death, they were celebrating the simple joy of being alive and part of something greater than themselves. Similar scenes played out across the galaxy as Grace's symphony reached populations that had been carefully isolated from each other for generations. On factory worlds, enslaved workers laid down their tools and joined hands across species barriers that the Empire had spent millennia creating. In refugee camps, beings who spoke different languages found themselves singing together in perfect harmony. The Zephyrian fleet moved to engage Jake's ships as planned, but something unexpected happened when the human vessels began broadcasting the symphony at maximum power. Many of the Empire's crews were not Zephyrian, but conscripts from conquered worlds who had been forced into military service. When they heard the music, their loyalty to the Empire began to waver. "Sir," reported the communications officer on Vextar's flagship, "we're receiving surrender requests from 17 of our escort vessels. The alien crew members are refusing to follow orders." Vextar watched in disbelief as ships that had served the Empire faithfully for decades suddenly broke formation and began broadcasting the human symphony themselves. The crystalline High Regent could not understand how mere sound patterns could override years of military discipline and psychological conditioning. Captain Jake Morrison realized that something extraordinary was happening when the enemy fleet began to disintegrate before his ships even opened fire. Zephyrian commanders were losing control of their crews as non-crystalline personnel throughout the Imperial Navy heard Grace's music and remembered what they had given up in exchange for survival under the Empire. All human vessels advanced to maximum broadcast range, Jake ordered. Continue transmitting the symphony. Do not engage unless fired upon directly. But the battle Jake had expected never came. Instead, he watched the Imperial fleet tear itself apart as different species among the crews chose sides based on something deeper than military loyalty or political allegiance. They were choosing between a universe built on efficiency and control, and one that recognized the value of beauty and individual worth. High Regent Vextar found himself commanding a flagship filled with beings who no longer considered him their leader. His own bridge crew included Karathi navigation officers and Vorthon communication specialists who had begun humming along with the human music. For the first time in his long life, the High Regent felt something approaching fear. "Shut down all external communication systems," he ordered desperately. "Isolate the crew quarters and prevent contamination from spreading." But it was already too late. The music was not just playing through the ship's speakers. It was being sung by every non-Zephyrian crew member aboard. The symphony had become a living thing that could not be silenced by shutting off machines or isolating populations. It existed in the hearts and minds of beings who had finally remembered what it felt like to hope. Grace's composition reached its climax as musicians across the galaxy joined their voices in the final movement. The song told the story of every species that had ever dreamed of freedom, and every individual who had chosen dignity over survival. It spoke in mathematical harmonies that transcended language barriers and cultural differences. The effect on Imperial control was immediate and total. On Nexus Prime itself, alien workers and administrators began walking away from their posts to gather in public squares, where they sang human songs together. Zephyrian security forces found themselves surrounded by beings who were no longer afraid of punishment or death because they had found something worth living for. High Regent Vextar made one final desperate attempt to preserve the Empire by ordering an attack on Earth itself. But when he gave the command, his own crew refused to follow it. The Karathi tactical officer looked at him with eyes that held no hatred or anger, only pity for a being who could hear the most beautiful music in the galaxy and perceive it as nothing but noise. "The Empire is finished," the officer said simply. "Not because we defeated you in battle, but because you taught us that we deserve better than mere survival." The surrender came not through military conquest, but through something approaching collective enlightenment. Across thousands of worlds, beings who had accepted oppression for generations simply stopped cooperating with the systems that had enslaved them. They did not fight the Empire so much as they walked away from it to build something new and better. Jake Morrison found himself accepting the surrender of Imperial fleets without firing a single shot. The crews that remained loyal to the Empire were almost entirely Zephyrian, while everyone else had either defected or simply abandoned their posts to join the growing celebration that was spreading across the galaxy.